Good morning. We'll give it a few moments and let folks load in.
I'll go ahead and get started with the introduction. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mwape Jokic, and I'll be your host for this session. We're excited to have you with us today to explore the To-Go Advisory Group and Sensiba webinar, topic being Measure What Happens, Empowering HR to Drive ESG Impact with ASB Standards. Our panelists today are Jennifer Harity and Donna Hamlin. Our goal is to provide you with actionable insights and practical tips that you can use right away. Before we get started, please, this webinar will be recorded for future viewing. And if you have any questions, please use the raise hand feature and we will get to you to answer your questions. Only the hosts and panelists will have cameras on and microphones enabled, and the attendees will be on listen mode. We're looking forward to a lively and informative discussion. So I'll pass it over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mwabi. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are going to dig into all things ESG and sustainability and what are the right metrics that y'all should be looking at, and how to tie in the financial aspect, how to tie in the HR aspect, which I know Donna will share about a little bit as well. So we are your presenters today, Donna and I. I am from Sensiba. I'm the ESG and Sustainability Director. Been with the firm for 13 years. Donna, do you want to tell a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm the lead partner for the HR division of the To-Go Group, and we do a lot of work with clients in this area, so I'm excited to be part of it.
So a little bit more about Sensiba. We are a B Corp accounting firm based out of California. We now have a global presence as of a couple of weeks ago, which is crazy to think about. We are in California, Oregon, and Australia and Ireland now, which is very exciting and fun. We do all the basic accounting stuff, tax, advisory, consulting, audits, but with also sustainability and risk assurance as well. We've been in the business for almost 50 years now, and really lean into our strong B Corp values of using our business for a force for good and helping our clients do the same. Donna, you want to talk a little bit about To-Go?
Sure. We started out early on with more focus on finance work, but we've now added all these different divisions so that we've got the C-suite taken care of. And the HR team is doing a full suite of all HR services. Whatever it is, we can cover it. And it also includes talent support too. If you're looking for somebody for a particular role, we can handle that. We are also interested in all things that have to do with the overall outcomes of businesses, and sustainability support is one of those items. And it is typically an obligation that gets into the hands of HR because the impact is tied to the engagement of employees, the culture of the entity itself, and the outcomes tied to the values of the enterprise. And you have to be sensitive to what that means to the recognition of the brand of your entity when you're doing this work. That combination is all tied to the collaboration between HR and whatever committee of the board is looking at that. It might be the Human Capital Management Committee or another name by another group, but that combination is powerful, and HR has a big role in it, and that's exciting.
So what is ESG? I know there's many folks that have been on the ESG journey for a while and they understand it, and there's folks that are just starting their journey. So we want to make sure we level the playing field so everyone understands ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it falls under kind of a triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. Some people call the quadruple bottom line: people, planet, profit, purpose. And it's basically a framework to measure all of the non-financial data, right? Many of us have been measuring the financial data for businesses for millennia, right? This helps you tackle and categorize and measure and particularly make qualitative objectives and quantitative targets for all that non-financial data that a lot of businesses hold, that is just as relevant in business health and decision making as the financial data. So it's a great benchmarking tool, to look at the overall health of your organization, not just looking at just that financial metric, but all of the other non-financial KPIs. And it's invaluable when you integrate that into long-term strategic planning. It helps you forecast out a lot longer than just the financial data alone. Because, the financial data, when you're looking at it, it really gives you a rear view mirror type of look at your business, where the non-financial KPIs allow you to look at things through the windshield, and look at future and where you're going. So particularly when they're integrated in with the core strategic plan for your organization, I'm a big fan of ESG initiatives, and non-financial initiatives need to be more than a tack-on initiative. It needs to be woven throughout the core business strategy and planning for the organization, so that it really does bring a lot more impact that way to the business, a lot more impact to the bottom line and the top line in a very positive way, as we'll talk about later. So you may find it silly that an accounting firm is talking about ESG, but that is where a lot of this work is being done, because it is numbers and data. Who better to evaluate numbers and data than accountants? And so it's really ties into the financial aspect of a business. There's lots of financial risk. ESG risk is financial risk. And I'll probably say that a lot today, so excuse that, but it is very important to drive that point home. And when you integrate this non-financial ESG KPIs, risks and opportunities in with your current strategy that you would have for, say, your financial strategy for your business, you end up having a lot more robust strategy that is risk proof, if you will. It helps inform better decision making. It helps you hold yourself accountable to yourself, to your employees, and to your clients. And because you're, mitigating that non-financial risk, it also helps you mitigate that financial risk, and just creates a more equitable world. It's one of those, ESG has kind of become a political word, and we don't want to hit the politics today. We want to just say, hey, we all want clean water. We all want clean air. We all want people to be treated with respect. So ESG very much is all about just the data and not the politics. So as I'm hoping to show you guys today, it just makes business sense, a lot of this stuff, when you look at the actual activities that underlie the term. And I often will tell my clients, I'll call it whatever you want to call it, as long as we can continue to do the work, which is important for your business success. Because at the end of the day, the only people that really need to be undertaking ESG work are people that have employees or revenue, which kind of everybody, right? Donna, do you want to talk about a little bit about HR's role in supporting ESG initiatives?
Yes, and to add to your commentary on that too, it's not really politics that we're worried about. The choice here, if you were in Europe, it's a mandate and everybody's doing it because they have to. Here, it's about choice, that we're adding quality to what we do with a long-term view. And that's a choice, and it's an important choice. Now, HR gets involved because it has an impact on the workplace. And you're working on the inclusion of the programs that are important to actually make it happen. So you're getting people engaged in it and being part of the definition of this value that is represented by the enterprise. It's also a big part of the ethics and the culture of the enterprise when you're doing this sort of work, and you're promoting the employee engagement in doing this and making sure that the policies are aligned with what you're doing. there's a lot of work with the reporting and the compliance and the interface with all of that data with the board so that you can make sure you're following something that looks like metrics or models or things that you set up as your goals. And it is a long-term view. It's not today only. It's got to have a long-term scope. So you're getting much more strategic thinking with this. And HR's got a big role in that. And making sure that that governance is well overseen means that the HR team has to work very nicely with the governance team to make that work. And that collaboration in many companies has not been that clear yet. So there's quite a bit of work to do to make that successful. And that's a big role.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I've worked in a lot of organizations where different operational departments are kind of siloed. And the companies that I've been in that have been more successful companies have really had the operations team come together and work together as a collaborative team. And so, yeah, the HR working with the governance, working with IT and ops and marketing and finance, all coming together. That's where you get real power is in that teamwork.
Yes.
So, and that really plays into deepening the relationships, right? When you come together as a team, you're much stronger, and that includes your external stakeholders, right? Your lending institutions, your investors, your suppliers, your customers or clients, your employees and your regulators. When you pull these people together and you're really working together and strengthening those relationships, you're going to be much more successful. COVID really, I think, set that as a lovely example. One of the many kind of small silver linings that came out of COVID was the businesses that really did have those deep relationships with their suppliers, with their customers, clients, with their employees, ended up recovering from the COVID economic hole that many businesses felt, really recovered faster. If they had really good supply chain relationships, they were able to recover faster. If they were able to have really good relationships with their employees, they were able to get people back to work faster. And that helped them recover and bounce back after the pandemic with a lot more success than their competitors. So why should small and medium businesses care? Typically, when you think about ESG and sustainability, you think about large public companies because they have been reporting on this stuff for almost a decade now. They've been putting out impact reports and sustainability reports, or just including these numbers in their annual business reports, baking it in. And small businesses really should be paying attention because the more mandatory reporting that the larger businesses have to do, the trickle down is going to hit them, because who is in the supply chain of small to medium size, who's in the supply chain of larger businesses, but small to medium size organizations. So, those mom and pop food shops that have their products in Target or Safeway, Target and Safeway have to report. And a lot of these companies that are the big companies that are reporting, say they have European entities, they have to report in Europe for the CSRD and the CSDDD. Like there's reporting requirements that are happening right now that's mandatory. So they're already doing this reporting. So as they start to do this, one of the big metrics that is the first trickle down impact is in carbon emissions. And particularly carbon emissions are measured in 3 different buckets or 3 different scopes. And that third scope 3, that third bucket, that handles the supply chain emissions. And so they're digging down into their supply chains, which is hitting the small to medium sized folks. And they're getting asked, do you have your numbers? And many of them don't. And if they don't, they may not be a supplier anymore. They may get cut. Certain big retailers like Nordstrom's are requiring their folks that give them product for their stores to have a CDP report, CDP report, Climate Disclosure Project. It's early, people. Words are hard. So, they're requiring these reports with, which is an ESG framework. There's lots of different ESG frameworks out there. CDP is just one of many. You may have heard, SASB, GRI, B Corp. These are all different ESG frameworks. But they're requiring CDP and a score of C or better, or I should say grade of C or better. And so many folks, in order to hit a C, they have to do full carbon emissions. So it's one of those things that it's starting to hit down the supply chain, and we're starting to feel that trickle down. While the marketplace has not heard, the average consumer hasn't heard about this type of reporting until only recently. A lot of the bigger businesses have been doing this reporting, like I said, for almost a decade now. And we're starting to see that trickle down, because it is starting to trickle down, and it's really would behoove small to medium-sized businesses to get proactive with this before that trickle down of mandatory reporting hits them. Because just like the financial reporting, which starts the big businesses and then ends up trickling down, as we see over time, to being more mandatory for medium size and then smaller size, usually scaled, but still mandatory. We're going to start to see that with these ESG mandatory reporting requirements, is where it's starting with the big companies, but it's going to start to trickle down to medium size and small size, and then all businesses will probably need to be doing this very soon. So looking at your value chain, thinking about the impacts, and this stuff is not just, here in the US is not mandatory yet. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Not mandatory yet. It is still voluntary. It's no longer voluntary in doing business, right? People are wanting this data, and they want to see it, and they want to see folks acting on it. So sustainability has lots of these drivers, right? Different levers that you can pull, different things that it pulls out, like cost savings, or, looking at risk management in your physical supply chain, your reputation, right? Pointing to current media, we can look at the reputational hit that Target has taken. We're all very familiar with that, I hope. Target, as they decided to not engage in DEI anymore, they took a real reputational hit, which hit their bottom line. I don't know if anyone saw the last earnings reports that they released, but they're dramatically lower year over year. And they're starting to really come out and say, okay, we might have been wrong on this one. And of course, Costco's going, you think? So because Costco inversely came out and said, they built their reputation, right? They said, no, DEI is important to us. The metrics and measurements that we use, it makes business sense for us. And to reverse back, they very much went above and beyond in saying, we're not going to cut this. And the reputation was bolstered for them. So reputation is a huge play, depending on how society sees your engagement in these things. And we're starting to see bigger shifts, boycotts, and versus stores overflowing with customers, right? So, and the earnings reports are very, black and white. Those financial numbers are showing the impacts of the non-financial data. So in real time right now. And then of course, there's the regulatory risks. So of course, you're going to get penalized if you don't report for the mandatory stuff. And we're going to get into talking a little bit about what are the mandatory stuff that's coming up here in the US. Obviously, federal, not going to really see anything there for probably another 4 years. Pretty safe to say. But states are starting to come into play. California, a lot of the other states are following California as per usual. But the regulatory stuff is starting to come into play here in the States. And then there's lots of opportunities with sustainability stuff in the market and technology. And that's what's really great about doing this work, is that you can unpack, one, the risks to make your business stronger, but two, there's really cool opportunities here for a lot of businesses if they dig in. And so we can kind of get into some of what that is. And Mwapi, I see that there are some comments here. I just want to make sure we're not
No,
losing.
those are just to the panelists.
Just notes for us.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. Ooh, Mwapi is telling us all sorts of good information about you guys. Thank you. I was like, there's questions. If you guys do have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the Q&A box or the chat. We're happy to answer them anytime during the presentation. So let's dig into sustainability impacts. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, okay, well, we're talking about ESG and we're talking about measurements, but how does this really impact and what are the impacts, right? So operationally, definitely energy consumption, increasing your renewable energy, right? Which anybody can do. You can just call your utilities company and say, hey, for anyone here in California working with PG&E, automatically 20% of your energy blend is renewable energy. But if you call and ask, you can, not only for your business, but for your own personal home, you can elect to go into a higher blend of renewable energy. There's even options for 100% renewable energy, which then lowers the emissions of your organization or your home, because you're not using dirty energy, or we'll call it virgin energy, right? It's renewable. It's coming from wind and solar and different parts of different systems that are renewable kind of all come together to make up that renewable blend. You're looking at water usage and waste, and you're reducing your water or reducing your waste, lowering your footprint, but also lowering your cost. I was working with a client that was a manufacturer that we started looking at, okay, well, how can you recycle more of your stuff? How can we improve your production line for less waste? And he ended up going from 2 dumpsters, full dumpsters, getting emptied twice a week, down to 1 dumpster getting emptied once a week, and then having a recycling dumpster and processes for the employees to do that. And it not only helped the employees with their morale, they felt better because they were like, wow, we're not wasting as much. This is awesome. They took pride in that. But also when you start adding up how much it costs for 2 dumpsters to get emptied twice a week, like the cost starts to, really hit that bottom line. So being able to reduce that or reduce water usage, right? And then having electric vehicles in your fleet, that reduces a lot of just gas. The cost of gas has been fluctuating and a little painful at the pumps over recent years. So, having electric vehicles really helps with that. And there's less maintenance on electric vehicles. I don't know if anyone has an EV car themselves, but there's less maintenance on those vehicles, which those maintenance bills, as we know, can add up. So being able to pull that back. On the social side, tracking metrics, tracking the diversity of your suppliers and your philanthropic activities, right? And then the value chain, which I think we've talked a little bit about already, which is, the reporting requirements in scope 3, and engaging different suppliers with, code of conduct type stuff, making sure everyone's playing by the same rules and holding themselves accountable. And then using more recycled things. Donna, do you want to have any comments?
Yeah, just to chime in a little bit about that, your comment about DEI. DEI will never DIE. It's getting a new name. It's all about inclusion now. Everybody's stepping away from the other term, but the smart entities know that the results, when you create diversity in the combination of talent and types of people, the ideation and the creativity goes way up. The results are better. All the research shows that. And the younger people who are involved in entities understand that now. So the culture is going to be there for the smart organizations. Doing that will make a huge difference. And that's, again, another thing for HR to look at. But DEI will never DIE.
That is a
for the
quote, Donna.
organizations that are smart.
I love that quote. The quote of the day, folks. DEI will never DIE. I like that. I've not heard that before. So I wanted to show a materiality matrix. So our firm, we do double materiality assessments for organizations to really look at, like, what are the material KPIs that you should be looking at for your organization in your geographical area, right? Really targeting in on what's going to be the greatest impact. And so we do these type of materiality matrix. And here's one that we did for a technology corporation. And you can see on the vertical axis, we've got the importance to external stakeholders, right? And then this is a transportation company, not technology. And then the bottom is the importance to the company. So you've got your stakeholders in your company, and this is all plotted out in different tiers. So, the furthest out, that's tier 1. That is what's the hottest priority, down to tier 2, and then down to tier 3, right? So you can see, for instance, being a transportation company, external stakeholders, they're worried about noise. They don't want to hear the trucks, right? So noise is kind of a tier 2 and really close to that stakeholder line, where, transportation company, they're like, our trucks make noise. They don't really care as much about it, but because it's a stakeholder concern, they need to. So, different things that you can see plotted out here, and you can see we've color coded them, which is environmental, which is social, which is governance. Obviously, every company, a big one is going to be innovation and technology and data security and privacy. So technology is huge today, where it hasn't been, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, wasn't as big of a play. But right now, because most of business is online, most of business is in the cloud, data security, cybersecurity, huge for almost every company. So we see that across the board, that this is a big kind of industry agnostic metric that folks really should be looking at and paying attention to. So I just wanted to show this to you, just to kind of in your mind, so you could kind of play. And when we start digging into the actual standards and metrics, which we'll get in a little bit later, you'll start to, in your brain, probably start plotting it out like this. What is more concerning for folks than stakeholders versus the company, and why the company should care about stakeholder concerns, right? So here is just a snippet of what regulations are out there right now. So we talked about CSRD, which is the European mandatory standard for reporting, which came into play January 1st of 2024. I should back up and start with, when accounting suddenly realized that non-financial ESG reporting was going to be a thing in the accounting world, the main body that oversees the accounting standards, IFRS, came out and said, okay, well, this is going to be a thing. It's going to be in accounting. We should have a standard setting body for that. And they developed the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, to kind of set up the rules and standards for how to look at sustainability and climate data in the accounting world and how to account for it, right? And so that organization was started back in November of 21. That is how new all of this is in the business world and in the accounting world. So the ISSB came together and they said, okay, what ESG frameworks are out there that are kind of best in breed? Who's got a really good handle on this stuff? And let's start pulling stuff together and distilling it down into one standard, which made investors very happy, because investors for the longest time were wondering how ESG scores were calculated, because they would look at different companies and, one site would say they were, an ESG score of 80, and another site would say their ESG score of 40. And they're like, well, what is it? Because not all the things were being measured accurately across the board, right? It's kind of like if you had your own personal FICO score, and TransUnion said you were 800, but Experian said you were 400. At like the bank's going, okay, well, how do I rate this person for a car loan, right? So it's hard when investors are looking at different companies and things aren't getting measured apples to apples. So ISSB came out, and their first two standards that they released, S1 and S2. So S1 is sustainability related risks. S2 is the climate related financial risks. So they really came out and said, okay, here are the standards. Here are the apples to apples, instead of apples to pears or apples to mushrooms, as some frameworks we're looking at. This is how it should be done. And this is how it should be, things we should be looking at and should be recognized in the reporting for organizations. And so A lot of the standards have now shifted. A lot of the frameworks have shifted to that ISSB 1 standard. So a lot of things are starting to harmonize together, which is wonderful because I can tell you 10 years ago, you weren't cool unless you had your own ESG framework. There was a lot of them out there. And it was very confusing. That's why investors were going crazy trying to figure out who was doing the right ESG things and measuring sustainability and doing sustainable action in a positive way. So this has really helped streamline and harmonize a lot of the frameworks, which has helped us be able to build out regulations and hold companies accountable. So that's what California is doing. So you can see on here, we've got California State Bill 253 and California State Bill 261. 253 was put forth by Senator Wiener, and it deals with reporting your climate data. So your emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3, and scopes 1 and 2, you will have to report the first year, which is 2026, next year. So if you're not measuring, you should probably get on that. So you're going to have to report, and this is for companies that are $1 billion in revenue or larger, and do business in California, have a business, or do business in California, which California is the 4th largest economy in the world. That's kind of everybody does business in California. So if you're $1 billion or more, you're going to have to mandatorily report starting in 2026, scopes 1 and 2 for 253. And then in 2027, they're giving 1 extra year for scope 3 because scope 3 is a lot more complicated. So scopes 1 and 2. So scope 1 is your direct emissions, right? It's the emissions, how much gas are your fleet vehicles using, or what are the emissions of your production plant, right? Scope 2 is your electricity. You go over, flip the switch on the wall, turn on your whole production plant or your whole office lighting, right? Electricity. Scope 3 is basically everything else. It's the kitchen sink, which includes supply chain and your value chain. So that one's a little more complicated. There's 15 different categories in that one scope. So they're giving everyone an extra year. So that reporting will not start until 2027. However, as we know, because scope 3 includes the value chain, the supply chain, we're going to start to see more and more small to medium companies getting asked for their data in 2026 or early 2027. So it's really small to medium sized companies need to get on this measurement train. So that is California State Bill 253. California State Bill 261 put through by Senator Stern. And that one deals with your climate related financial risks. So disclosing, what you've done to look at your climate related risks. Have you done climate scenario analysis, right? Have you done transition planning, things like that? What are you expecting financial wise because of these climate related risks? One, a lot of companies are having to increase their budgets for their insurance. Some companies in some areas can't even get insurance, right? Because one, maybe they're in the Northern California with all the fires, so they can't find an insurance company to save their lives. Like it's just, there's a lot of concerns around that. So really calling out what your risks are from the climate change, from, climate related disasters that are hitting your financials, right? To kind of call that out and say, what are you doing to mitigate that? What are you doing? Do you have an extra line of credit just in case? Do you have, certain things that you're doing within your organization to make you a lower risk so that your insurance doesn't go up, right? So different things that you can talk about in 261, and that is for companies that is 500 million in revenue or larger, will have to report. And that report is done every 2 years. 253 is every year. 261 is every 2 years. And that starts in 2026 reporting. Now, the actual guidance on both of these is currently being thought out for the reporting entity, or a lot of the reporting is going to go to CARB, California Air Resource Board. And they're currently putting together all of the rules for implementation for this. They did have a webinar, was last week or the week before, talking about where they are in that process and kind of stuff that they figured out, and then asked a bunch of questions on like, okay, well, we need help with this to figure this out, because they're doing this as a very collaborative way. So we expect that we're going to have full guidance by this a little bit closer to the end of the year. So it's going to be a quick turnaround. So what I can say is, if you do fall into the buckets of mandatory reporting for each of these, get as much done now, right? Do your basic carbon inventory, do a climate transition plan. start taking a look at your climate related financial risks so that when you get the full guidance on how to properly report all these things, you're already ready to go. You're not playing catch up, right? To do this right after they release is going to be a little tough, where they did say, because they were supposed to come out with full guidance in July, and they said we're going to need a little bit more time. It's probably going to be the end of the year, but they're not moving the date to start reporting. So it's still 2026 as the first date for reporting. So we need to start getting people to start doing stuff now so that we're not playing catch up in November, December, January timeframe to be able to get this reporting done. So that's kind of the breakdown of what's going on. CSRD, let me know in the chat or in QA is if any of you do have European reporting, and we can dig a little bit more into that. But I think for this group, we might just be US at this point. So I will not dig too far into CSRD. I'm waiting to see if anything pops up in the chat or Q&A on that. Okay, we'll just go ahead and skip that going in more depth there. And Donna, did you want to add on anything?
No, not on this point.
Okay. So ESG is a measurement tool for risks and opportunities. So we already talked about the ISSB, right? Really great way to start plugging in and adding guardrails and guidance for this information. So we're doing that apples to apples measurement. And you can see the IFRS Foundation, they now hold both the accounting side, the financial side, and the ISSB, the non-financial side. So it's coming together and harmonizing. And I expect that in the next 10 years, we'll probably start seeing financial statements look more like due diligence reports with having both data side by side, which is going to be really wonderful for businesses to be able to make better decisions.
This is really important because it allows you to learn from each other on things that are working, or borrow an idea that worked really well and apply it. It's a great way to bring good minds together and come up with great ideas. It's very helpful.
Yeah. And I think it's really going to impact businesses when they go to lenders, when they, go to banks. Banks are going to look at this and go, oh, well, you're doing all the ESG work. Great. You're a lower risk versus companies that aren't. Same thing with professional insurance, right? When you go, we recently re-upped our professional insurance. We actually had to increase it because we're now a global firm. And so, a lot of that was taken into account, that we are a certified B Corp, that we have done a lot of this work, which helped us look really good at understanding our risks and having mitigation plans, which makes the insurance company go, oh, well, you're not as big of a risk as, say, this other firm. So it really helps. Like I said, it hits that bottom line some way or somehow in lots of different ways. So as we talked about this already, the harmonization of all the different frameworks. I'm sure, while you may not know all of the different frameworks out there, you've probably heard of one or two: GRI, SASB, CDP, TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So they're all starting to come together and harmonize. Even GRI has stepped up and started to harmonize more with ISSB. B Corp has started to harmonize with GRI. So there's lots of different frameworks that are starting to just really come together and kind of walk lockstep with each other. And so this was just a deeper dive into some of those bills. And you guys are all going to get a copy of this deck. So if you're trying to take screenshots or taking notes on this, we have it all here, and it will come to you today or tomorrow, so that you have this as data and cliff notes for a lot of what we're discussing. So how to start? Many folks are like, where do I start with this? Like, our company hasn't undertaken this. We do a few things, but they're more tack on, or there's not really woven in. Where do I start with this? And I think the best way to start is to start with a high level assessment of your materiality, doing a double materiality assessment. So a double materiality, the double part is because you're looking at not only your sustainability risk, but your financial risk at the same time and where the overlaps are. And so having that materiality assessment where you get that matrix where everything's plotted out really helps you understand where you should be looking, what you should be looking at, and it gives you kind of a roadmap on where you can strengthen and bolster your organization, and then opportunities that you can take advantage of for greater top line growth, right? And we'll get in, like I said, I have a case study for you to really illustrate that. The assessment, it'll identify 5 to 10 top KPIs. And it helps you compare baselines to your competitors. So you can kind of get a look, okay, where am I at in this? And the assessment will go through and give you any notable findings and risks. And then just kind of recommendations on next steps. So that's what these types of assessments do. Here are your KPIs, here how you're measuring against them, here's how you compare with your competitors. Here's what you should be looking at. Here's our findings and risks, and here's our recommendations on next steps. So it's a really lovely starting block because it gives you a roadmap of where to go, and what is material. Otherwise, you're hearing all these different buzzwords and terms. It's kind of like anyone who has gone on their own health journey. You hear about all these different supplements, and so you're trying all the supplements because you don't know what's right for you. It's kind of like that in the ESG world right now, where companies are doing all these things and measuring all of these things, but is it really material to your business? Is it going to be what is going to give you the greatest impact? So having this as a starting point is really nice.
Anna has a question.
Sure.
I'll allow you to ask the question, Anna. Go ahead.
Hello, Anna. We can't hear you if you're muted.
Okay, I'll read the question. It's all this probably makes sense for larger companies who can afford paying for all additional reporting. What about those companies who are under 50 employees, maybe 5 million per year? And is this yet another way to add to workload and nickel and dime?
Oh, very, very good question, Anna. There are a lot of tools out there to really help you undertake this work that are free. You can do a lot of this work. If you're with your HRS or your HR company, right? If you're with an ADP or if you're with an Insperity, they already have a lot of the really great DEI type stuff and reporting that you're going to need already baked in. You might have already your IT department, they probably are already doing a lot of the data security stuff. It's just reining all this stuff in. You have a lot of the KPIs, right? Your worker health and safety, your attrition rate, right? This is all ESG data. It's all the non-financial data that you can kind of pull together and create your own scorecard. The SASB, which is the framework that is most used for materiality assessments and what is kind of the underlying framework for the ISSB. Those standards, which we're going to look at some different standards today, those standards are free and accessible for folks. You can download those and get an idea. So you can do a lot of this work without hiring a consultant like myself for those smaller companies, because we recognize it just makes sense. Maybe you just need a couple hours of, say, a fractional CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, to come in and kind of help guide you a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 hours a month, which isn't, I would think, a huge cost for a small company, just to kind of get that outside perspective. Donna, I see you nodding.
Yeah, it's not as awful as it seems for the small companies to have a consultant or somebody just help with the strategic thinking on options. The tools are affordable. And if you want to put some time into it with a small team and you make the design right, then it's the optimization of it that's the work. But it's very valuable. And in fact, Jennifer's going to now show an example in a minute that I think is powerful as an example of the value of it.
Right. Right. So yeah, it's completely doable. And I guarantee any business has somebody in-house that would be a very passionate leader that just wants the opportunity to do something like this.
Yeah.
So you know, it's doesn't have to be as costly as the larger companies have it, because the larger companies are doing big complex emissions reports and big complex impact reports, which do cost a lot of money. But the smaller businesses, because it's what's material to you, there's a lot of wonderful free tools out there. There's a lot, you know, the standards are all free and accessible. And there's lots of great training videos and just free education out there on what to look at and how to implement some of this stuff. And just a little bit of guidance, you know, from somebody who has a sustainability background, you can really make an impact even for a business that's 5 million in revenue. This really does have wonderful impacts for all size companies. So thank you. All right, so that case study. So we had a wine client that we did basically a carbon inventory. So we looked at all their emissions, scopes 1, 2, and 3, and said, okay, we looked at all your emissions, and the biggest offender here is, of course, the shipping, right? We're shipping heavy glass bottles, these cases. If anyone's picked up a case of wine, they know it's not light. So we said something very scandalous in the recommendations is that maybe you should lightweight your bottle by 5%. Now, this is quite a scandalous recommendation because the wine industry has this myth that the heavier the bottle, the better the wine. And I don't know about you, but I've had some light bottles with some fantastic wine and some heavy bottles that weren't so good. So it is literally just a myth. The weight of the bottle has nothing to do with the beautiful contents of it. So they were a little taken back by that suggestion. And they said, okay, we will do it with just 2 of our brands. And we said, okay, that's a good start. So we literally shaved 5% of the glass. It was off the bottom, the punted bottle. And they went ahead and distributed it out, and they saved money. They saved carbon emissions, right? Because it doesn't take as much to make the glass bottles, because you're not melting as much glass or taking as much heat to melt as much glass to be able to make the bottles. The bottles and the cases were weighing less, so the cases themselves were shipping for less money. So from that, they documented that first year, $26 million in savings. That is an M. That's not $1,000, $20 million in savings. Now, this is when, you know, they invested quite a bit of money since 2015 into their sustainability. And, you know, 19 million, that's, you know, that's, to Anna's point, that's a lot of money. But to result in 26 million in savings, like that's huge. They also had we suspected they might sell more wine, but we didn't realize. So the folks that were actually stocking the cases in the stores that were building the front displays, they didn't want to carry the cases of wine that were heavy. And they realized that these 2 brands, the cases weighed less and didn't hurt their backs. So they started building the front displays with their wines. And they didn't have to pay for the front prime placement either. It was just the staff themselves saying, well, this doesn't weigh as much. I'm going to use this to build the front display. So they suddenly started selling more of those 2 brands. And they said, okay, this is awesome. We're saving money on the shipping, on the bottles themselves. We are gaining more money because we're getting prime placement in stores. So they went ahead and took this across all their brands. And that's where they got all the savings. So, but you know, the savings, it didn't include actual revenue generation and goodwill, because they were getting higher sales, and the staff started to see the better sales and that the reduction that this was having. And so the morale was really excited. They were really excited about this. And to this day, we cannot use their name on this case study because they don't want anyone to know they lightweighted their bottles because it's still such a myth.
And so it is getting out a little bit without a name. I met with the head of a family vineyard last week, and she's doing the same thing with their bottles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the story's out there.
The story is out there.
And this is a small vineyard group, but they're going to save some money too and do a good thing. And I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a wonderful example of even just doing a basic carbon emissions and seeing where your emissions are gives you the opportunities to see where you can shift and make small changes. 5% glass light whiting off the bottle is not huge, but it makes a big impact.
Right.
So this is a wonderful story that we like to share. So preparing for the demand for the middle market, right? Middle market, small to medium sized folks. The climate rules are going to take effect here in California in 2026. So being prepared for that, if you are somebody that has to report, being prepared for that, if you are in the supply chain of somebody who has to report. So if you, any of your services, any of your products, right? This hits service companies, right? If you are a law firm or you are an accountant or you are an insurance company for some of these public companies that have to report, guess what? You're in their supply chain too. So you need to have your data just as much as the actual manufacturers, right? We expect that companies who sell to publics or have state and federal contracts will need to disclose this. Now, I know that federal might not take effect as quickly as the state right now. It was prior to the new administration, that's the way it was headed. But I expect state and global contracts, this will come into play. But understanding what your direct and indirect emissions are and kind of going after some of those low-hanging fruit items really does help. And what also helps is aligning your carbon management platform, whatever you might choose to use. Like I said, there's lots of different options out there. There's high cost ones, and then there's low free ones, but aligning those with your ERP for efficient reporting. So, the last few years, we've really gotten a lot of ERP systems really hook in well, or even have their own carbon emissions platforms built directly into them. And that's great because we're no longer having to show up with a shoebox of receipts for carbon emissions, similarly to showing up at your accountant's office with a shoebox of receipts for your financial stuff. That's kind of how it was before, trying to pull all the data from all the different systems to do the actual, carbon reporting or GHG reporting, ESG reporting, GHG, greenhouse gases. Just want to make sure everyone knows that term. But it's really gotten a lot easier. A lot of ERPs have those tie-ins, or just you can go and set up your ERP, just adding a couple extra fields, or changing, adding an extra GL code so you can kind of pull something out and stick it in there to kind of hold that data so it's easier to report on. So getting all that stuff squared away right now in 2025 will hugely benefit you down the road for when you actually have to report in 2026 and 2027. Okay, so let's take a look at what some of those KPIs are that we should be looking at. So we'll have KPI tables that very much look like this. So you'll have your topic here on the left-hand side with, energy management, water management, food safety, and then you'll have your metric, the type of category it falls into, whether it's quantitative or just kind of discussion analysis, helpful units of measurement. So you make sure everything is in the same metric. So energy management is going to be in gigajoules. It's not going to be in kilowatt hours, right? And then the actual code that it falls under. So that when you're reporting, you actually align everything in a kind of index mapping of your metrics so that it can be easily audited, because some of these reports will need to be audited in the future or have some level of limited assurance. So some of the issues and opportunities by industry. So consumer goods, looking at your product design and life cycle, your product packaging. Data security, like I said, data security, it's kind of across all industries, really. Data security, cybersecurity, just because of the digital nature of business right now, huge in almost any industry. Employee engagement and diversity inclusion in consumer goods, energy and water management, including retail and distribution, right? Need to be looking at those. In food and beverage, you just really start looking at the ingredients and the impact of your ingredients, both the environmental side and the social side, right? Human labor, right, in your ingredient sourcing. What does that look like, right? We saw coffee company Nespresso get a really big hit a couple of years ago because of human rights issues kind of coming up in their supply chain very publicly. And so while they were doing all of the right things environmentally, socially, maybe not so much. So they've come out and they're working on it. So, but that's very much, the food and beverage industry having those impacts. Energy and water management in food and beverage, obviously, it's big. Your emissions, your carbon emissions, fleet vehicles, and your refrigeration, particularly in food and beverage. Refrigeration has a whole different emissions category. Ingredient sourcing, product label and marketing, right? We're looking at marketing. Are you marketing ethically? Those different ways. Professional services. We have a whole different kind of standard for professional services because we don't really have water waste as much, right? Like we've got the water in our bathrooms and the water in our kitchens. And for a lot of folks aren't even in the office to use that. So, but looking at advertising and journalistic integrity for professional services and our DEI and our data security and privacy and our IP protection and competitive behavior, right? The integrity and ethics piece for professional services is really huge. In engineering and construction, you think of structural integrity, workforce health and safety, life cycle impacts, and kind of environmental impacts of projects. That's going to be more relevant in those industries. And then technology and communications, data, privacy, energy management, IP protection, competitive behavior. Like there's different things in each industry that are going to be more salient to that industry when you start to think about stuff. So normally we would do breakout groups, but I think we're such a small, intimate group. I think we can maybe just kind of come together and talk real time if you would like. And we can go through a couple different SASB metrics tables to kind of take a look at stuff, to see what resonates for you, what you would expect, what you might not expect. So let me go ahead and pull that up. So we'll start with when you open up a SASB standard. And actually, before we dig into this, Donna, do you have anything else you want to add?
Not yet.
Okay. So we've got food and beverage here. And when you get the standard and the different standards, there's different standards for different industries. And sometimes you might pull in a couple different, like 2 or 3 different standards to kind of really encompass everything for your company. So retailer and food distributor, and you scroll down, it'll have a little bit about the SASB, the table of contents, the overview of, the different descriptions and metrics using the standard. But what you really want to scroll down to is this metrics table. This is where all the juicy goods are. And so what you would expect to find in food retailers and such is fleet vehicle management, air emissions from refrigeration. Remember I said refrigeration is a big one. Energy, food waste. I think the top 2 things to really hit the largest emissions in the planet is food waste and fashion. Those are the 2 big things that are really massive right now that we're as a planet trying to address. So food waste is a big one. Data security, just because nature of the beast, we are all digital organisms now. Food safety, big one in food industry. And then product health and nutrition, right? Are you putting out things that are packed full of processed stuff or full of sugar, or maybe it's using things that are ingredients that are banned in other countries that you might need to disclose, things like that. product label and marketing, right? Labor practices, and then management of environmental social impacts within your supply chain, right? And then just disclosing the amount of retail locations, the amount of distribution centers, just kind of where you're operating, right? And I would also like what would fall under this would also be if you have any like co-packers or anything like that, you probably would want to call them out that you use certain places for co-packing. For professional service companies, because I know we've got some folks here from professional services, data security, DEI, professional integrity is a big one. And then it's really service companies, it's less about the product and more about the actual people. And so number of people, part-time, full-time, temporary contract, hours worked, percentage billable, things like that. And so that would also, we would pair, for instance, we use this particular standard for our firm, but we also layer in, there is an advertising one to really talk about our ethics in advertising. We use those two for professional service firms the most. You would get food retailers and maybe you would layer in food retail, and I believe there's one for distributors and things. So there's different layers that you would want to pull in here and just kind of look at, okay, well, here's the metrics, here's what's most relevant to us, right? That's where having a high level kind of dual materiality assessment done so that it takes all of these different metrics and says, okay, well, out of these like 30, here are the 5 to 10 most relevant for your organization. It's going to make the best impact for your organization. So I'd love to hear from, looks like we've got Jeff and Seth on the call. If you guys have any questions or like just thoughts, like aha moments, what has kind of come up for you guys?
I don't myself. I mean, for me, it's I'm still trying to. This sounds like I've worked for a B Corp, ran a B Corp, and we had to go through a lot of this. I'm kind of still trying to wrap my head around the whole expense. This all makes sense to me, but it's expensive in terms of a small to medium-sized operation, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all the mechanics of getting this done. So that's just a comment here.
Yeah, no, and that's particularly relevant from a B Corp, because as we know, B Corp has a new set of standards out as of April 8th. And in that new standard, depending on the size of your company, a double materiality assessment is going to be necessary. And they're requiring a double materiality assessment once every 3 years. So yeah, I recognize that. There's a new bar that has been raised for B Corps, and trying to navigate that is been a challenge for some. But I think once you look at the new standards and really sit down with them, it's not as scary as I think a lot of people are making it out to be. And I think a lot of
It's the first round, and then after
it is
that,
the first round. It's
yeah.
the unknown. But I think sitting down and really digging into them and understanding them and what's going to be relevant for your organization. They have it year 0, year 3, and year 5. So really looking at year 0, and what you're going to kind of have to that gap analysis between where you're at now with, you probably were certified on the previous version 6.
Yes.
And the new standards that are coming out, and just kind of that gap analysis and kind of making a little punch list of like, okay, well, here's some of the things that we're going to have to look at. We're probably, most B Corps, we've never had to do a human rights policy before. That's a good place to start. Like, let's look at us. What are the salient human rights issues in our organization, in our industry, and put together a policy for that. Right. So that's a great place to start, getting a carbon inventory done. And I'm not quite sure when your recertification date, because B Corps, for those who don't know, need to recertify once every 3 years. When you do have that recert date come up, planning out like, okay, here's our punch list of stuff we have to get done. Here's how much time we have. And let's start chewing through this list and understanding, like, let's maybe go get a few proposals and like for some of these bigger pieces that we might need help with, and understand like, okay, what's our budget and cash flow going to look like for this project? so that by the time you get to having to resubmit, you're already there. You already have done the work over that, and you spread it out over 3 years, so that it's not as, I would say, painful to kind of do it in like the 6 months leading up to recert. So I highly would recommend that. And there's a lot of wonderful consultants out there that can help you break this down if you would like help with it.
Yeah, and we did that, and I would say that just in my experience with the research, I think the planning is all important. Although SMBs, you call them SMEs, sometimes the planning is a little scattershot. But it seems to me that if we would have done that better, it would have been a lot less painful to go through the process, the research.
Yeah, yeah. I wholeheartedly believe in eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the first round, it can be difficult because you're learning a lot, all in that. But what I love that's happening in Europe now is that they are coming together as entities. They're not being competitive because they figured out something cool for themselves. They're sharing it with each other so that the good ideas are swelling across. They're way ahead of us. And if we could get to the point where we get through the first, it hurts because we're learning, and then we start to share, we will get the same kind of positive outcomes. And that would be exciting.
Yeah. And, I know in the B Corp world, we're all about sharing, particularly with even competitors. We ourselves have helped other accounting firms become certified B Corps. So I think if you reach out to, I believe you are in the food and beverage wine industry.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you reach out to fellow wineries, I know Artesa just got certified. Very excited about that. Tres Noir, Fetzer. There's lots of great B Corp wineries out there. I may have even named yours, just not knowing which one you're from. But I think there's lots of wonderful wineries that are out there that are certified B Corps or that are just really doing wonderful sustainability work. There's a lot of wineries that are part of IWCA, International Winery for Climate Action. My colleague Julian Javaro, who's my fellow director here at Sensiba, actually was one of the founders there, and did a lot of work with that. And so there's lots of wonderful wineries out there that are doing really good work that are happy to share.
Yeah, I like your point about collaboration because I actually, the B Corp I ran was North Coast Brewing out of Mendocino. And we got to the point, there's another one up there, Thanksgiving Coffee and Fetzer, and they're actually doing some, now I'm not with them anymore, but they're doing some joint work with, in terms of sponsoring. So there's definitely collaboration going on, which I think is a great thing.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a wonderful, wonderful community of folks.
Yep.
Yeah. Seth, Anna, any other like insights or questions?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think this is great, and I was thinking that spending a little bit more time with you and possibly with Donna in order to understand where this can really hit home with the diversity of clients that we deal with. I think the glass in the bottle of the wine is a great example, but because in the consulting world, we deal with so many different clients in so many different industries. I would love to hear, how we might be able to, target opportunities with clients in, like you said, the professional services or in family office or in, those types of different industries in order to be able to educate our clients a little bit more on this topic. And that way, when we're educating them, then they're coming back to us and saying, okay, now we need to engage.
Yeah. Yeah. Family office is a great point. Working with families and understanding their why, right? What is your why as a family? What would you, as macabre as it sounds, what do you want your tombstone to say? Right? What do you want to be known for when you're gone? And where do you want your investments, right? Where you put your money is probably the biggest personal ESG risk, if you want to say, or opportunity, right? And so family office, educating your family office clients on, you really can make an impact on just where you're banking or where you're investing, what you're investing in, the types of real estate and that you're dealing with, and real estate companies that you're dealing with. So I think educating them and really leaning into their why, if they have a why that is more environmental, if they have a why that is more social, learning that, and leaning into that, and helping them get their purpose fulfilled with their investments and with how they're managing their money.
So every one of those would be case specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone has their own personal why. Yeah. So yes, would love to talk with you more, Seth, on that. That would be wonderful. Anna? I know she was having issues with her mic earlier, so I don't know.
Yeah, she said she was having issues.
I have one more comment, Jennifer, if you have time, or let's wait for Anna.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we found up at the brewery was, and there's a great book out there called Generations by somebody named Gene Twenge about, and I'm a youngish boomer, but that again, it's the right thing to do. But what we found out at North Coast, and this was during COVID when I ran the business, was that millennial generation and younger, they don't want just a great product, but they want to know what your company stands for. And so that was a huge issue. And we heard that over and over and over again. And I think that, again, that's sort of a more pragmatic than do the right thing. But I think there's a lot more pressure on companies to not just have a great product, but to have something else that appeals to that demographic. And maybe it's just not that demographic, but it's others. But we heard that over and over and over again. And it was kind of, as somebody who's been, let's bottom line from a dollars and cents standpoint, it was eye-opening. So just something to throw out there.
Absolutely. Millennials really started driving that train. And Generation Z has really kind of, I would say, operationalized it, because Gen Z is very much more in the social media and out in the public eye more. They've really started raising concerns, and they're starting to come into their buying power as we're starting to see the generational shifts on who has more buying power, right? Right now it's millennials. They make up the largest, I would say, percentage of buying power right now. And I think that's shifting to Gen Z. As they start to come of age right now. They're hitting the workforce. They're making their own money for the first time, right? And they are wanting to spend their money on things that have meaning. Right?
Absolutely.
These are folks that kind of came of age during COVID, when it was all about just wanting to share a meal with somebody, and making, there's I had the opportunity. Here's a wonderful presentation by this person who is basically a sociologist, and she did this whole study of Gen Z because of her kids, and wanting to understand them more, and their drivers, and she was noticing their buying, and when they buy stuff that is more higher quality, but also, it's when they want to make a meal, they want to make sure it's all organic, it's all fair trade, it's all about the quality of the ingredients, because that's how they share love with others, is taking something and not buying a big ton of everything. It's very intentional purchasing. And we're starting to see that generation, and the generations after them being very intentional purchasing, and making sure that they really are buying and putting their money where their values are, which I think is something that we're just seeing a lot more of as the younger generations come up with.
And that applies to their retention in the job too. It's not work, it's identity and value. It's richer, a decision that they make. So it's extending the brand. That's fine when you do this, but it's also about retention of good talent, that they feel like they're contributing in a bigger way than just the job. And that makes a big difference.
Right. And that kind of brings us into the next part of just storytelling, and how you share what you're doing in a way that is authentic and genuine to your organization and to where you are in your journey. So really talking about what does the future hold for all of this, right? It's going to be increased regulation. It's going to be increased stakeholder scrutiny and accountability, right? As we're talking about, Gen Z coming up, and we've got alpha and now beta that's being born. Like it's all of these different generations coming up. And so they're really holding, feet to the fire on a lot of these things and asking for accountability and transparency. And just having those opportunities to use your business as a force for good. And helping your community and the planet, having clean air, having clean water. This is all stuff that everybody should have, right? So impact reporting and sharing your story, and articulating it in a genuine way so that it's not coming across as greenwashing, right? Greenwashing is, talking about, things that you're doing that are positive that maybe aren't as positive, right? Talking about, boasting about how green you are, but really your only green thing you have in your business is maybe the recycling can in the corner, right? So like talking about this in an authentic way and saying it's completely okay to come out with an impact report and say, you know what? We just did a materiality assessment and found this. We're at the beginning of our journey and we recognize we have a long way to go, but here's how we plan to get there. And you're going to get a lot more reputational bolstering from that than doing all the work in silent and then coming out with a report 5 years later saying we did all this great stuff, or we're here, and everyone's like, wait, what? You're now a sustainable company? What? Talking about your journey as you're doing it is very authentic, and then it shares with other organizations that are trying to do the same, and makes it so that everyone feels like they can come in and start at any given place, because not all businesses are going to be able to undertake this or want to undertake this work. And that's fine.
A good example would be EIF, the cosmetic company that's here in the Bay Area. And they did a wonderful promotion of all the work they did on DEI and what the value and return to the business and to the out world was. And they wrote some funny articles when DEI was coming out with the politics and what have you as to why that's stupid. And they even did one about the campaign that dicks only serve on boards. And what they meant was every person on the board was a guy.
Yeah.
A Robert, a Bob, a Dick. And that they were one of the exceptional public boards that had diversity across the whole table and what value that showed. So telling that story is important because it shows the value is real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So let's go ahead and recap this. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we have time to dig into any more questions that you might have. But I want to end with reminding you ESG risk is financial risk. And there are risks in not undertaking this work, not disclosing where you are in your journey. A little anecdote, Sensiba, we rebranded back in 2023 from Sensiba Sanfilippo to just Sensiba, and with a whole new logo and brand. And when we did that, we wanted to have, some fun stuff for employees, some fun swag, right? All sustainable, of course. But when we made, the marketing team went out and said, okay, well, what do we want? What would be fun to have? And they made this big list of all these things. And they said, okay, well, of this list, who is a B Corp, who's women-owned, who's minority-owned, who is a small business that's local, and anybody who didn't hit that criteria automatically got eliminated. Those companies never knew that they were suddenly eliminated from a purchasing opportunity, because they said, okay, well, who's sustainable? Who is a B Corp? Who's minority owned? Who is, a small local business that we can support? And those companies that weren't talking about what they're doing weren't even part of that list. And I think this is happening more and more as more organizations are thinking about where they're spending their money. And so to not even be a part of the opportunities, that's going to be huge. And, as we're seeing now play out in real time between Target and Costco, company's public reputation can either suffer or really take off, right? Employee recruiting and engagement. I can tell you when we first became a certified B Corp and put that certified B Corp logo on our recruiting booth. For those who've never been to a campus recruiting event in the accounting world, they literally take 40 or 50 accounting firms, put us all in a cafeteria, and it doesn't really have good HVAC, and open up the doors. All the students come in to our booths, and all the students immediately go to the Big Four: KPMG, Deloitte, EY, PwC. And the rest of us kind of sit there and twiddle our thumbs for the next 20 or 30 minutes until the students suddenly start to trickle down to our booths. Well, that first year that we had the B Corp logo on our recruiting backdrop, the students walked in, immediately started heading to the Big Four, but then stopped dead and went, wait a minute, there's a B Corp accounting firm? Because they're learning about what this is in school. They're learning about ESG. They're learning about conscious capitalism. And it speaks to them who they are and their values. And so they seek out companies that are sustainable, that are doing the ESG things, that are talking about it, that are certified B Corps. And suddenly we were just as busy at our booth as the Big Four. And we had accounting firms coming to us going, so what's this B Corp thing? Because they saw the draw. It really does help. We've been able to pull seasoned professionals over because they want to work for a B Corp, or they like what we do. They like that we have an ESG sustainability department, not just a niche, a department. And you can't really manage what you don't measure at the end of the day, right? So it's better to measure these things, right? And it's stuff that you guys probably already measure. Your data security, what is your time up? What is your amount of hacks that you've had, right? You're keeping track of that stuff, or I hope you are. Your attrition rates, these are all important data that you're probably already measuring and tracking, but putting it into a scorecard that incorporates all of the data into one piece is important. So there is my information and Donna's information. If you guys have any more questions, Donna, do you have any parting words?
Well, I'd suggest that if you have any questions related to your own business and where to get started or anything in the first steps, call Jennifer or me and we'll give you some advice and get you going.
Yeah. And is there any other last minute questions or just comments, aha moments that you guys have had? All right. Well, I guess that means that we have answered all the world's problems and questions, Donna.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking the time on this. I know the front end is tricky, so getting started is great. And thank you for doing it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.